Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. About 2 years ago, we started this series as a way to continue engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. Speaking of which, we have our next developer summit coming up in Palm Springs, March 10th through 13th. We have a lot of new topics, advanced features, and additional functionality to share with you over the coming months, so be sure to stay connected with us through our GeoDev webinar series page on go.esri.com/geodev or on any of our social media accounts at Esri GeoDev. We would love to have conversations like these taking place throughout the year so that when we do meet up at one of these Dev Summit conferences, it will be as though we've never stopped. We hope you get as much out or more out of this webinar than you anticipated. Now, we would like to introduce you to today's webinar, Tips and Tricks for Developing and Debugging Applications. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot here of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce you to one of our presenters, Heather Gonzago. Let's get started, shall we?
Great, thanks, Jim. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for dialing in. Does this picture resonate with any of you guys? Maybe you just had those times where you just can't figure out why you're not getting the results that you expect. Your app is just not running correctly. You just keep staring at the same code over and over. Everything starts to blend together, but still nothing is working. If you can relate to anything that I said, then hopefully you can benefit from a few of the tips and tricks that Kelly and I have picked up along the way. In addition, we also like to pick other people's brains too. So some of these tips and tricks are things that we've grabbed from our developers in our development team here at Esri, and also from users like you all. You guys have really good, useful things that you do, and you've shared them over the years, and we are listening. So yeah, we've decided to go ahead and hopefully you guys can pull from some of this and take this in your day-to-day workflows and be better programmers in the long run. So before we get started, here's the URL to my GitHub repo. It's going to contain all of the slides. As you can see up here, I'm actually pulling from it right now. So if you guys want to follow along later, if you're anything like me, I know sometimes when I go to these or I listen to these or I go to like a session somewhere and listen to everything, it's kind of like drinking through a fire hose. It's a lot of information and you're trying to digest everything, but I like to go back in afterwards and kind of re-look over things and kind of take my own time and digest it all. So the demos, everything that we discuss, links, everything is in here within the slides. So I have this, if you want to take note of it, take a snapshot of your screen. We'll also have it at the very end as well when we're doing questions. All right, so over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing, the first thing we're going to be doing is Kelly's going to show you how to set up your development environment. There's a lot of really cool, helpful tips and tricks that some of us use to get our IDE set up and running more smoothly, and it can help make our day-to-day tasks a bit more efficient. Once that development environment is set up, we're going to go ahead then and take an already existing application. We're going to show you a good application, and then we're going to take that and we're going to break it. Okay, so we're going to go in, take the broken application and troubleshoot it to determine where the actual crux of the problems might be coming from. In doing all this troubleshooting, we're going to discuss some helpful web browser developer tools. Basically, regardless of the browser that you work in, all of them should really, they all have a flavor. It doesn't matter what browser. So what we're going to be working in is Chrome. But regardless if you're in Firefox, Safari, whatever it may be, they all will have their own flavor of developer tooling, and the functionality that you see here within our demos should be similar to what you can get if you're using something different. And then lastly, we also set aside some time to answer any questions, maybe if you want to bring up during this session. Any questions that we're not able to address within the time period, though, we will address those in a soon-to-be-released blog article after the webinar. So with all of that said and done, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Kelly, and she's going to talk a little bit about setting up your development environment.
Thanks, Heather. I'm not sure it's showing my screen. 1 second.
You're good.
Okay, thanks, Heather. There's lots of different choices, from simple code editors like Notepad++ to IDEs with tons of bells and whistles, like integrated debugging and the ability to add extensions to simplify development. For the last couple of years, I've been working mainly with VS Code, a free open source IDE from Microsoft that has great support for JavaScript and TypeScript and many useful extensions. Extensions add additional capabilities to your IDE, like GitHub integration, theming, debugging, beautifying, linting, and more. Let's look at a few of these extensions I use on a regular basis. So here we are in Visual Studio Code. Many of these extensions are available as plugins for other development environments. So the first one is something like a linter. So linters like ESLint analyze your code to help you identify syntax issues and help enforce a coding pattern. They work in conjunction with a configuration file that defines your organization's coding standards. So in my application, if I violate the coding standards, I'll see I have some warnings down here that help me quickly fix the problems in my application. Things like beautify and prettier help you keep your code looking nice, which is easier to read. So let's say I copied some code from someplace else, or I'm working on my code and I move things around and things get out of whack. Well, I have it set up so that when I save, prettier or beautify run and make my code look nice again. Bracket colorizer is another one that I find really useful. So if you can see here, these curly braces have the same matching pink color. These parentheses have the same matching yellow color. So this is bracket colorizer. It helps me really quickly identify where the beginning and end of a particular block is located. And the last one I wanted to quickly show you is one called Git Lens. If you use GitHub integration, it's really nice sometimes to be able to see when you or somebody else last updated a particular line of code. So if I'm working in my app and I notice a change and I can't remember why I made that change or when I made that change, I can just select that line and I can see that there's a little tip that says I changed it 7 days ago. And it has a little pop-up that will take me to the commit information, so I can actually click here, go and look at those commit details and refresh my memory about why I made that update. So we saw this demo in Visual Studio Code. Programming fonts are another sort of feature that I like to use. Programming ligatures create new glyphs by combining characters and can make the code easier to read for some. There are many examples of programming fonts that support ligatures, like Fira Code and Cascadia. So if you can see in the image, if you type !equal, that stands for not equal. And in with the font ligatures, you'll get this symbol right here, which is the double equal signs with the line through it. One potential drawback of using a font with ligature support is that it's no longer super easy to tell which combination of characters you need to type in order to generate that glyph. So if you're a new developer or working with new developers and you look at code that uses ligatures, it might not be 100% clear what keystrokes you need to type in order to create that inequality operator. Code snippets are useful extensions that simplify the process of using common coding patterns in your application. In VS Code, snippets are available that help you quickly write code by stubbing out common code chunks. For example, for me, the one I can never remember is how to write a switch statement. For the life of me, I can't remember if the colon goes after the case keyword or after the value. So with snippets, I can just come into Visual Studio Code, type switch, choose that statement, and it stubs it out for me, and then I just need to enter my values. So I find it a really nice helper function. We have also created some snippets available for use with the JavaScript API. So it's available in the Visual Studio Marketplace. You can install it for VS Code. You can read more about the extensions or snippets we have available, like those to quickly create a web map or web scene and various rendering helpers. If you have a snippet that you'd like to contribute, you can come here to the GitHub repo, submit a pull request, or if there's one that you'd like to see, you can create an issue and we'll take a look at that. If you want to create your own snippets, there's this snippet generator tool that lets you just paste in your code and a title here, and it will create the snippet for you that you can then use in VS Code, Sublime Text, or Atom. Emmit is available out of the box in VS Code and as a plugin for many other IDEs. We have a link to the plugin page on this slide. Emmit provides shortcuts for generating HTML and CSS. Let's take a look at this in action. So here I have a blank file with the .html extension. If I want to quickly stub out the HTML for it using the Emmit shortcuts, I can just type exclamation point, tab, and it's going to stub out a whole HTML document for me. There's also a bunch of other really nice shortcuts. It's worth spending a little bit of time becoming familiar with Emmit. For example, let's say I wanted to create an unordered list with 4 items that each have a class name of item. So I can just type this syntax and it's going to stub out this unordered list with the 4 list items for me. So it saves typing, which saves mistakes. It's also worth taking a little bit of time to become familiar with TypeScript and or Babel. Using either of these gives you some nice advantages when working with the API. My favorite feature is that you get code assist for the API. Along with code assist, you'll also be able to take advantage of ES6 features like template literals, destructuring, arrow functions, and more. We have documentation on how to get started using TypeScript available in the JavaScript API SDK, so you can read through that. And for Babel, we have instructions in the GitHub repo that Heather shared to you. We have a README file which has instructions for how to install and get up and running with that. Let's go take a quick look at some of the features. So here we have that Babel demo. This is available in that GitHub repository. So there's a couple of things that you get along with code assist. So let's look at that first. So here, if I want to do something with a map, I can type map dot, and I can see that I get a list of the available properties and methods. I can choose one and see that I get great IntelliSense, so I can figure out how to write my code within the environment. So that's a really nice feature. You can also take advantage of ES6 features. I really like this object property shorthand. Here, when we create the map view, we have a variable called map, and if that has the same name as one of these properties, we can omit the duplicate. So we don't have to type map:map, we just type map. We can also use this import syntax, which is really nice instead of using require. We'll see later how this can help us avoid a common gotcha. Finally, you're going to need to set up a web server and access your application via HTTP or HTTPS. For Windows, this typically means setting up IIS, and for Mac and Linux, Apache is a popular choice. An alternative to installing IIS or Apache is to set up a local dev server. VS Code has an extension called Live Server that launches a local dev server with the push of a button. Another option is something like HTTP Server or Express that can be installed using Node. Another way to get up and running quickly is to use a starter app. Renee, one of the Esri developers, put together a really nice starter app that's written in TypeScript and uses Webpack and Calcite app components. This is a great app to install and extend to suit your needs. You can see that it has an area for the map, a side panel for showing some tools, in this case, legend and layer list. It also has a header section and a footer section. So you can find that app using this link. There's the GitHub repo that has installation instructions and the source code available. So now I'm going to turn it back to Heather, and she's going to go over some more troubleshooting tips.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. So now that you have an idea of some of the tips and tricks that you can, help making your developing more efficient, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the things that you can do when you're actually trying to troubleshoot an application. So first off, it's really just trying to narrow down the problem. That I personally think that can be one of the hardest parts. The reason there's an onion here, or a picture of an onion, is I always like to think of it as kind of like peeling an onion. In order to get to the actual root of the problem that might be going on within the code, sometimes you just have to peel and strip away a little bit at a time until you get to the actual root of the problem. So first, you're probably going to want to make sure that the issue isn't just with how you wrote your code. Maybe you're using a property incorrectly, a method incorrectly, you're missing a semicolon somewhere, just something at the code level. Next, you're going to want to make sure that maybe the problem isn't with your code. Maybe the problem is, something in the client or the API, in the JavaScript API, or maybe something, with ArcGIS, with the server, on the server end. If it is with the API, this could be a bug. We do try to catch those, but we don't always succeed. And at these times, this is when it's really good, when you can have a focused, narrowed down application that demonstrates the actual issue that you're experiencing. And then third, sometimes the application might be running fine, but it's just not performing as you would expect. Maybe latency issues, maybe it's performing a little bit different. I don't know if you're on a mobile device as opposed to a desktop device. Those are one of the things too you need to kind of take into consideration. And then lastly, sometimes the problem, it's not with the actual application, how it's written, with the API or the server, but it might actually just be with the data that you're using. For one example, maybe you're trying to perform, editing on complex geometries, and you're wondering why your application isn't performing as you would expect. This is something specific to how your data is being structured. So I mentioned earlier that we're going to be using, we'll use our web browser's developers tools to help troubleshoot a bad application. In our specific case, we're going to be using Chrome, but I mentioned previously any of these, the popular developer tools nowadays, you should have a set of developer tooling that's going to be similar in functionality to what you actually get with Chrome. So first, let's focus on debugging some code issues. Here are just a small set of common problems that people may come across when they try to run their code, and they either, one, maybe they don't get the results that they expect, or maybe two, maybe they get nothing at all, and they don't even get errors within their developer tools. They're stuck. They're not getting what they expect, but they're not sure exactly why and what's going on. So some of these can come about from maybe, first one, your modules being out of order. This is a big one, and honestly, I don't really care how long you've been writing with the JavaScript API, it still trips a lot of people up at times. The module order basically means making certain that we keep our require statements and the arguments in the correct order when we write out our code. This can easily get messed up when you're doing a lot of editing and copying and pasting, let's say for maybe like samples or snippets. This is where, if you just remember what Kelly showed, using the import statements, that helps, and it's awesome because you don't have to worry about the module order issues. Another big one is when you don't wait for your view to load completely. So the view contains your map, and the map in turn contains your layers. And if all of these aren't fully loaded into your application, when you try to use some functionality off of them that isn't quite yet available, you will get errors. And then the last one, it seems so basic, but it really does happen a lot. Typos can trip up even the most experienced developer. Now, though, Kelly did show you some of the tricks in the developer tools, like the code assist and the IntelliSense. So having typos, hopefully should get caught during the when you're actually writing out the code, but sometimes it still happens, right? Like I know for me, example, if I'm just throwing something together really quick to test something out, I might even just open up my my developer tools and just set a workspace there and write it out and just run a quick test, and I could have typos very easily. So that is something to keep in mind as well. All right. So I mentioned the module orders out of order. Probably 9 times out of 10, when you do have your module orders set incorrectly, you're gonna receive a message similar to the one at the top where it says something like, here it says a.load is not a function. It'll be whatever, like whatever class, and then whatever, maybe a property or a method call is not a function. That's basically saying that you are trying to use a property or method off of a class that's defined differently than what you intend it to be. So I'm actually going to show you a quick example of this. I think it makes it a little bit easier. First off, just to kind of make things a little bit easier to follow, we created an application. So this is the final application. This is what you're supposed to see at the very end. We have our base map, we have a layer, we add this layer in from, actually we're adding a web map in from ArcGIS Online. We have a search widget. The search widget performs a search based on some pirate activity here in the Caribbean, and then it goes, zooms to the selected search result and gives it a specific picture marker symbol as the result, the selected result. So now I'm going to take the same exact application, and I'm going to run it again. And I have nothing, like there's nothing here. And this can happen. So generally the very first thing I'm going to do is you want to open up your developer tooling. I'm going to open up the dev tools. So this is Chrome's dev tools. If you're not familiar with this, an easy way of accessing this is if you go into Chrome and go to the ellipses under more tools, it's going to be under the developer tools. Okay, and it's going to be very similar on the other browsers as well. It'll have some sort of preferences where you can open and grab it. I'm just opening it from the shortcut keys. And the first thing I see here in my console, in the console, is an error saying that map.add is not a function. So, all right, that should pretty much clue me in that it's probably a module order thing, but I don't know, let's say I'm kind of new to all this, I'm not quite sure. So I'm going to go ahead, take a look at where it's throwing this at main.js line 28. We see here map.add graphics layer. I know that the map has an add method. That should be fine. If I want to double check, you can go into the developer's help into our SDK and just do a quick search. In this case, I go to the API reference and I searched for map and clicked on the methods, and I see, I know this. So this should work. I know this is right. There's nothing wrong with what I have written. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a breakpoint to this. I'm going to rerun it. It's going to stop on this breakpoint. Now, if I hover over the map class, you'll notice here I have a bunch of properties that are given to me. These don't look familiar. These don't look like properties that I should have off of the actual map itself. These look like properties that I would have off of the view which contains the map. You can set your extent, animation, and so forth. So what I would do at this point is take a look at the very top, and you'll notice here my require statement. Actually, I'm going to open up some code and make it easier to see for you guys. This is the same code. So I have my require statement. I'm going to require the web map module and the map view module. And in my functions callback, I'm going to set the arguments for these. This is important because if you use require statements like this, you have to have them in the correct order. I don't. It looks like I'm trying to set I'm using the map view, but it's I've got them flip-flopped. So I'm using the map view as the web map and the web map as the map view. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to switch it around. Okay. And save that. And let's reopen it. Stop. Let's remove that now and rerun it. Awesome. So now I actually have something. I see my map, I see the web map, I see this layer. So web map module order, we got that taken care of. All right. So we take care of the module orders, but sometimes the map will display fine. All right. So we have our map here, right? But maybe some parts of it don't display as we would expect, or maybe they don't perform some sort of functionality that we would expect to see. Remember that this is the bad one, the one that we're fixing. This is the one that we need. I'm missing something. I'm missing my search widget. So we need to go in here and figure out what's going on. So some of the things that we need to look at beforehand, like to think about, is checking to see maybe, remember I mentioned before, we know that the view contains the map and therefore the layers. So generally you're going to want to make sure that the view is fully loaded before you do anything. And you do this by calling view when. So when the view is fully loaded, then go ahead and do what you need to do. Okay. Sometimes though, after that, you might need to have specific functionality, maybe even let's say off of a layer, but you can't actually access that until the layer is fully loaded into the map. One example of this can be seen when you set the view to the layer's full extent. So just a really quick example showing this. So if you take a look at our intro to, I think it's just the intro to layers sample that we have within our SDK, there is a section here. So basically what we're doing is we're bringing in this layer, and then once the layer is fully loaded, we're going to zoom to the location of that layer's full extent. Okay, so we're saying, hey, when this view is ready, take my layer. When that layer is ready, so when that's fully loaded, go in and zoom to the full extent. So if I comment this out and rerun this, it's not zooming into anything. So if I opened up my DevTools and took a look at the console, you'll see here I have these error messages that are popping up. Failed to create camera from target, missing target for creating viewpoint. And that's mainly because it's trying to access this property. In this case, it's the target property off of the go-to method, which it should be the full extent, but since the layer hasn't fully been loaded yet, the full extent's not ready either. So it can't bring it in, and therefore it's throwing the errors. Awesome. Okay. And then lastly, even maybe you've tried all of that and you're still not getting what you would expect. This is times when just a standard old try-catch statement really does help for troubleshooting what the actual problem might be. So let's go in and show another demo. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how we can go in and figure out why this search widget is not showing up. So I'm going to run it and open up the DevTools again. I don't have any error messages, nothing. So in this case, what I need to do is maybe take a look. We know that the problem is specific with the search. We know that the search widget's not coming in. So maybe add some breakpoints in here. So I know that my layer's coming in, that shows fine. So let's put a breakpoint here on my layer search on the search source, and maybe one here on where I declare the actual search widget, and then one here where I add the widget into the view. Okay, so now I have those breakpoints. I'm going to go up here, rerun it. It stops on where I set the search source, hover over it. It's undefined, of course, because it hasn't gone anywhere yet. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to try, maybe let's just try running. I'm not going to step through everything because it's going to go into a bunch of files. It's going to take quite a bit of time. So we're just going to resume. We're going to play or go to the next breakpoint. So I would expect this to go down to the search widget. I'm not hitting any breakpoints, nothing, okay? So it just basically goes back out of the app. I'm not getting any error messages, but I'm still not seeing the widget. So what's going on? So let's just run it again, see what happens. All right, still in here, got the search source. I'm gonna go, maybe, I don't know, let's see if I can force it to run to this point. No, nothing. I'm still not getting anything. I go in here, I don't know, let me just make sure I'm just not missing something. Do I get anything? Still not defined. I'm not, okay, so we know that the problem here is within this layer search. We know the problem is there, but we can't figure it out. We don't know, it's not working out. So at this point, what we would do is maybe just wrap this section in a try catch. Okay. All right, so all I did was when the view is loaded, I'm going to try this code. If any errors pop up, go ahead and console those errors out for me. So let's go back in there, rerun that, get rid of these breakpoints. Try that again. All right, now let's see, do we get anything? Fingers crossed. Yes, we do. Okay, so, well, I can see it right here. And you guys have probably been seeing this the whole time. You're like, hi, Heather, you typed it wrong. But this is something, especially if you've been working on something or you're doing a lot of copying and pasting, a lot of times, especially a tiny little typo like this, it can throw you off and you can just be looking directly at it and completely miss it. So if I click on this, it says, hey, my layer search source is not defined. Well, yeah, that's probably because I have a typo here. It's going to pull whatever I have declared as the name for my layer search source up here, which is spelled correctly. So another thing to think about too, and that goes back to your development environment, is that if you're using something that's got a little bit more bells and whistles, in this case, I got Visual Studio Code open, you'll notice here that if I hover, and if I was writing this and I took note, like I could see, oh, like, hey, I need to use this. It's declared, but it's never actually being read. And the reason is because of this typo. So let's fix that, rerun it. Awesome, great. So now my widget shows up, at least the display comes in as I would expect. Okay. All right, so we showed some basic troubleshooting using breakpoints. I had a little console statement in there, nothing major. We're going to make use of some of the developer tooling that monitors network requests. This tool is extremely helpful when you're debugging your app, since it essentially records all of your network requests that your app is going to make. I like to use this when I'm running an application and I need specific functionality, maybe like queries or geoprocessing, printing, any of that. The network tab can be used pretty much with anything to sniff out these network requests that your application is making. So let's take a look at another demo. And I'm going to go in here. Let's take a look at what it's supposed to do. All right, so this is the good one, right? The fixed one. I'm just going to go in and search, I don't know, Cuba. All right, so this is my display. These are my suggestions for the hits that I got off of this feature layer. So in my search widget, I set a feature layer as one of the sources that I'm going to be searching on. This feature layer, it has point locations for a bunch of pirate activity throughout, in this case, we have it throughout the Caribbean. So if I click on that, you can see it zooms in, I got my little pirate selected, gives me a little bit of information and so forth. So if I go back in here, let's try the same thing. I get nothing, I get a bunch of untitles. That's not right. So we need to figure out what's going on. So in this particular case, this is when I would go in and open up my network tab. So I've got the DevTools open up the network tab, and I'm going to rerun this. Okay. And let's go in and type in something. Open this back up, redo this. Sometimes I need to give it a jiggle. And it does, oh, there we go. Well, there you guys can see. I was trying to filter something. So earlier I was playing around with this and I was trying to filter out specific words within my network. So get rid of that. And you can see here, I'm gonna do all the XHR requests. And now, let's try this again. Clear those network requests. Click on Cuba. Actually, I'm gonna run it again, just to be on the safe side. Keep it clean. Clear those requests. Under the network tab, type in Cuba, get nothing. Open this back up. You can see here, it's performing a query. So let's take a look. We're going to open this query up in a new tab. Okay, so we'll see here, it's basically just pulling a query off of this feature layer, off of this piracy point feature layer. And I'm going to change the format of how it looks. Right now, it's just in JSON, the default. We're going to make it go to HTML just to make it a little bit easier to read and understand. So if we take a look and see, this is what I get back with that query. You can see here, I just had a bunch of FIDs, but I have this description as well. So if we take a look at the code, we have this layer search source specified with a display field. The display field is what is being shown in that dropdown. So in this case, we have it set for the field, this descript field, but we know that the descript field is blank. All right, so let's take a look. If we go back in and let's change the out fields to show everything. Okay, so we have an asterisk. Now it's going to show me all the fields that I have within this layer. I'm going to query everything. And it gives me a little bit more information. And I can see here, oh, hey, you know what? Maybe the first description might be a better one to use. So I'm going to go back into that code, and I'm going to change this from that nondescript descript to this new one that actually has some information. I'm going to save that out. I'm going to empty that cache just to be on the safe side, make sure that's clean. And there I go. So now I actually can pull something. Another thing I want you guys to take note of here, I'm zooming to the selected feature and I'm changing the features render to that of a picture marker symbol. You may not have noticed this in the code. I'll show you guys. But I'm pointing to a URL for this picture marker symbol, and this URL is referenced with HTTP, so it's not secure. My application, the actual application itself, is referenced using HTTPS. This is a nice feature that we have within our API. So and some of you might be familiarized with this, may have seen it, may not. If you try to access non-secured resources from a secured application, many times you can get CORS errors messages, you can get mixed content warnings in your console. We've made it within our API. We've done this, it's been around for a few versions now, but we automatically take that HTTP and change it to if it supports HTTPS, if it's on the same domain, we automatically change it to go to HTTPS. So even though my code should be written out as HTTPS, I can go in here and let's take a look. Hopefully my pirate will show. Yes. If you guys see this, if I'm hovering over it, it's showing up as HTTPS. That's how it's actually accessing this. Even though technically, if you look at my code, you'll see here it's secured. If you look at the actual code, the code is written unsecured. Okay, so that's a nice little added bonus that we've added into our API. All right, so I've talked way too much and I'm going to hand it over to Kelly now, and she is going to finish off talking some more about consoles and some CSS tricks.
I think you're muted, Kelly.
Thanks, Jim. I was muted. So, as Heather mentioned, we are going to talk about console and CSS. So you can use the developer console to view and log messages. You probably already work with console.log to log messages to the console during the development experience. But it's also a great place to check when you have unexpected behavior in your app. You'll often see warning messages that are logged by the JavaScript API. One example is if you use a widget that takes advantage of geolocation in your app, like the locate widget or including location in the search widget. If you run the app over HTTP, the geolocation capability won't be visible in your app, which can be confusing until you check the console and see there's a message log, like the example on the screen, letting you know that it requires a secure origin, so HTTPS, in order to use geolocation services. Another really cool trick with the developer console is you can interact with your app via the console. So actually, let's look at this in an application in progress. So here we have our sample app. I'm going to open the developer tools and go to the console. One thing that actually I could do is I could come to the sources. I could set a breakpoint in my app. So Heather showed you, how you could do this. So let's say I set a breakpoint. We'll do it right here at view. I'll rerun the app, and then when execution stops, I can inspect content through, by hovering over it and see the objects and properties. But what if I want to play around a little bit more with this? You can come to the console, and I can type view, and I can see that I have some things available. But let's just type view and hit return. You can see that it shows us the objects and properties. We can inspect the object as it is at this point in time. So this is a really nice way to interact and look with things in more detail. You could even type map.layers, hit return, and you get access to the layer so that you can look through those layers and see what layers you have available in your map. So that's a nice feature when working with the console. You can also get live updates. So in Chrome, there's this new little eyeball tool called Create Live Expression. And this is nice because it lets us create some code that updates in near real time. So I have two examples here. One of them gets the current view using this bit of code right here. It then gets the view's extent, center, and longitude and latitude and prints it out to the screen. So I can use this as I move around. You can see that those values change, and I can get the lat long of the current map center. So this could be useful if you wanted to test geolocation services. So in my app currently, if I click the locate button, it's going to take me to my physical location, which is in Washington State. But my app data is not really in Washington State. So maybe I want to test it there. You can come in Developer Tools, go to Tools, Sensors, and you can see that we have this geolocation sensor. We can override it by choosing one of the out-of-the-box locations, or we can choose Other and actually enter a latitude and longitude. So here I can enter that center value from the console up above, -87 point. Okay, so I've entered this new value. Now let me go back to my full extent. And when I hit the locate button, it's going to take me to that map center point that I specified instead of my physical location in Washington State. So this is a nice feature and a way to interact with your app via the developer console. Okay. And CSS, there's a lot of really nice things that we can do with CSS. One of my new favorite things is respecting users' color preferences. So now we see a lot of apps out there where people have a light theme and a dark theme. In the JavaScript API, we have a light CSS theme available and a dark CSS theme available, which is fantastic. So let's look at how we can respect users' preferences. I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. And if we look in our HTML file, we can see that we have these two link tags. The first one right here points to the dark CSS available with the Esri JavaScript API. And then it has this media feature specified. And we tell it that we want to look for cases where it prefers a dark color scheme. If a user has a dark color scheme preference, we're going to use this dark theme. Here, if they have no preference or they prefer light, we'll choose the light theme. So that's how we set it up. Let's look at our app. So here we have our app. If we go in Visual Studio Code to the settings, there is an option available down here in rendering that lets us test these preferences. So we can say what happens if the user prefers the dark color scheme. We notice the app loaded immediately with that dark theming in the JS API. So it's a really quick tip that gives a nice experience to users who prefer that darker theme. The last thing that we're going to look at is inspecting CSS styles. So if we go back to our sample application, and let's say we want to change this placeholder text, we can right-click in here and say inspect, and it's going to take us to the developer tools and will let us see the CSS associated with that particular element. So we can start drilling through here, checking various things and trying to figure out where that placeholder text is set. Or what I find easier is just go to the API for the widget, come here, and you can see that we have a SAS file available for all of our widgets. So if I know what I'm looking for, this is a quick way. I can just come here and type placeholder. Here are the rules associated with it. So I can just copy those, go back to my app styling. Here I have it preset, but you could paste those in, pick the color that you want. And then now if we update our app, we should see that we have this red placeholder text. So that's a quick way of figuring out the CSS rules that are applied to each widget. Okay, so now we have some time for questions.
All right. Thanks, Callie. And thanks, Heather. We are now going to begin answering the questions that were submitted during today's presentation. If you'd like, you can still add questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. We've received a few, and we'll try to get through as many as possible, but whatever we do not get to today, we will address in a GeoNet blog post after this webinar. So let's get started. Our first question is that the sample code that you showed uses require statements. Is it possible to switch those to import statements? And if so, is there a benefit to using one versus the other?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we showed earlier, let me bring up the webinar. We showed an example earlier in the session using import. So if you come to the GitHub repository for this session, go to demos, we have this Babel demo set up. And if we look at the source code for that, we can see that we actually use import statements here. I like it because you don't have to worry about the module order mismatch, and it just seems more intuitive to me to work with imports. So you can do it if you work with Babel, and you can also get it working if you work with Typescript. So you'll need one of those two options. And we have in this demo, we have a README that goes through the process of setting up Babel if you want to work with that. And if you prefer TypeScript, there is a sample in the SDK that shows how to do that.
Okay, great. Next question. When it comes to developing web apps, it appears we can choose between the Web App Builder SDK and the ArcGIS JavaScript API. I can see that both are based on the same JavaScript API, but just wanted to know the use cases for using one versus the other.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there are two different use cases. If you're already working with a web app builder, or if that's a good choice for you and it has the capabilities that you want to extend, that's a great option. So start with the web app builder, use the out-of-the-box tools, make customizations necessary. So that's sort of one roadmap for development. The second would be building an app either from scratch using the JavaScript API, or using a starter app like the one we included a link to in the slide that's available on GitHub that's just using the JavaScript SDK.
Okay, great. You had said earlier that users of our JavaScript API can contribute snippets to the ArcGIS snippet tool for VS Code. Where exactly on GitHub is that repo?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me go back to the slide. You access it through the VS Code Marketplace. I don't know if we want to bring up another. Oh, here it is. Okay. So if you come to the Visual Studio Marketplace and you search for the ArcGIS JavaScript API, you'll see that that has a starter page with lots of information, including a link to the GitHub repository for that snippet repo. So if you click on that, it's in the Esri organization. It's called ArcGIS JS VS Code Snippets.
Great. Okay. Where on GitHub can I find that TypeScript-based starter app? I think that was the one that you said Renee posted.
Yeah. So if you, Kelly, if you just scroll down, I'm sorry, it's easier if we just show you this way. If you just go to the README file for the tips and tricks webinar, and all of those. So if you click on that, the links are going to be directly in the directly in there. So for anybody, like, instead of trying to sit here and remember Visual Studio, Marketplace or whatever, you can go in there and just find that one where, the template, the starter app, and there's a link for that. You can click on it.
Okay, thanks. Do we need to have experience with Dojo before getting into using the ArcGIS API for JavaScript?
Nope, you don't really need to know Dojo anymore. It's sort of hidden from you, any Dojo work. So no, there's not really any reason to learn Dojo first.
Yeah, just to add on to that, so we didn't really talk about this in the beginning. We still have two flavors of the API. We have the 3x version and the 4x. We focus on the 4x because that's pretty much where all of our development efforts are going now. The 4x we will be phasing. The Dojo's going to be moving along. So you may be using it more on the 3x version if you're still using that, but otherwise, yeah, you probably wouldn't need to worry about it.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it for. Oh no, we just got a new question coming in. All right. Well. Let me see. It looks like this is a repeat. They're saying, what are the pros and cons about using Web App Builder and then customizing it rather than starting from scratch using the JavaScript API? Yeah, I think you hit that. But is there any other comments you want to make about that?
No, I mean, I think we can just reiterate that if the Web App Builder has the tools that you need, you can save yourself a lot of development time, right? If you're just making minor customizations to an app that you've created, versus if you have a different use case that isn't really supported well by Web App Builder, it might be easier just to start from scratch with the JavaScript API.
There's also a lot of third-party, in addition to just to add on to the Web App Builder portion of things. We do have a very active developer community, and there's a lot of people outside of Esri, within Esri as well, and also outside, that have created and are creating specialized, very use case business specific widgets to use within the Web App Builder. So that's also something cool and neat to look into as well.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you, Kelly and Heather, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Tips and Tricks for Developing and Debugging Apps. If you have any other questions, please contact us using the email address in the follow-up email. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. We will be publishing a video recording of this presentation, and that will be available within 7 to 10 business days on the GeoDev webinar webpage, which is go.esri.com/geodev. And so on behalf of Esri and our presenters, Kelly and Heather, thank you very much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.